Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Arm Your GDPR Data Protection Officer with the Mainframe Security Tools Needed to Navigate the New Law's 72-Hour Reporting Requirement, brought to you by CorreLog. My name is Andrea Ross, and on behalf of Share Headquarters, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Share is pleased to continue our webinar program with this informative and educational event. Please note that presentation slides and recording will be available post-webcast at share.org. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation via the Q&A box on your webinar toolbar. These will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Today's presenters are Peter Mills, Tony Perry, and Antoine Gruson. Peter Mills is currently the Vice President of Development and Support at CorreLog, Inc. He has more than 39 years of enterprise experience in information technology, having previously served as software engineer, systems architect, business analyst, project manager, and development manager on both IBM mainframe and Windows PC platforms. Throughout his career, Peter has spent over 31 years in senior management roles. Antoine Gruson is currently an account manager at Infotel, responsible for software sales in Southern Europe. He has 8 years of experience selling software to help large organizations to manage data performance, data security, records management, and quality assurance. Antoine has graduated from a business school with a specialization in marketing. His main strengths are vision and anticipation, strong communication skills, and honesty in his work. Tony Perry is CorreLog's Head of Marketing and Research. Tony has also served as Director of Marketing for direct response advertising agency DataMark and has previously directed the technology marketing strategies for Meridian Software, Mercia Software, and Logility Software, an American software subsidiary. Tony holds a bachelor's degree from the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Georgia, Athens. I would like to now turn the web over to today's presenters. Please go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Andrea. I want to throw out a little disclaimer here. There is a lot of legal speaking and legalese within the GDPR, and I just want to mention that we are not legal experts, and we encourage you to consult your legal teams concerning the GDPR if you haven't done so already. I have written a couple of white papers on GDPR, done extensive research on it, and our goal is to condense the key things in these standards and laws for technologists to condense it and keep it brief for the technologists with the technology slants onto it. Today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the GDPR, why you should care about the GDPR if you're in the U.S. or other non-European Union country. We're going to break down a few key points of the GDPR and how CorreLog can help keep the DPO happy. The DPO is the Data Protection Officer, a new role that you are going to be dealing with now that the GDPR is upon us. We will have our partner and friend from the European Union in France, Infotel, do a case study. We'll do a brief demo of CorreLog scorecards for the GDPR and finalize the presentation with some question and answer sessions. The GDPR's origins. So the GDPR dates back well before the internet, but the origins of it are really the EU Data Protection Directive 9546 EC. And this was born around the middle of the 1990s, about the time the internet sprang upon us. It has gotten us to 2018 and has now become the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. The thing you need to know about the GDPR, it's not a standard like PCI DSS, FISMA. It is law, and it is enforceable by a group of countries that comprise the European Union. It also gives power to EU citizens, and that power is over their personal identity information. You now have to answer to European citizens. A couple of titles you're going to need to know about related to the GDPR are the data subject, the EU citizen, the board that's controlling all of the legislation, the European Data Protection Board. Supervising authorities will work with the EDPB and help enforce the GDPR. Your organization has already likely assigned a data protection officer or DPO, and also controller and also processor. We'll talk briefly about third countries or sending data to third countries or giving access to individuals in third countries that are not part of the EU. The main obligations from the GDPR, this slide is a little wordy, but I wanted to get the verbiage as it shows up in the GDPR. I'm not going to read through these. I think the one that we need to take notice of as technologists is the bullet that says the obligation to notify authorities within 72 hours in case of a data leak, and also the penalties, which can be up to 4% of your global revenue or turnover, or 23 million US dollars, whichever is the higher of the two. The thing to note about the 72-hour rule is that if any of you are familiar with the latest IBM Ponemon breach study, the average time to detect a breach is 191 days. That makes the 72-hour requirement of the GDPR nearly impossible. We're going to talk about how you can use technology to help with notifications from the mainframe, particularly real-time notifications, and we'll do that later on in the presentation. So what you might be thinking, I'm an American company. The GDPR and the EDPB is not going to just come out and fine you on the first time. You'll get a couple of warnings, and the 4% fine or 20 million euros is for habitual offenders. What leverage does the EU have to enforce these fines? There was a case that was recently wrapped up that Intel had versus the EU. And though we don't know how widely known this case is, the thing to note is that the EU won, and they were able to levy a $1.44 billion fine against Intel. This sets precedent for the GDPR, and it gives the GDPR teeth to enforce any transgressions you have for not protecting EU citizens' PII. The one thing we want to emphasize here is get your legal team involved. Don't work in a silo, in a vacuum. So the so what if I'm an American company is very real, and you need to understand what the ramifications are if you become in breach of the GDPR. The EDPB is going to have some help in the title supervisory authority. The thing about the supervisory authority is that they will be the person who will be in contact with your data protection officer. The data protection officer will have to be in close communication with the supervising authority. The data protection officer will work with a couple of titles in your organization. The controller, which according to the GDPR is the person or agency who has the authority to process data, and also the processor, the person or agency that's doing the processing. We'll talk more about the controller and the processor a little later. But they will be working with the supervisory authorities within the countries in the EU where your business operates. So you now have to answer to the EU data subject. The data subject now has rights, and one of the most important rights of the data subject is the right to be forgotten. If they request of your organization that they be removed from your mailing list or have their PII completely removed from your system, you must do that. You have a time frame to do that, and then you must have proof that you removed them or you forgot them within your system. The GDPR is not really it's not really enforceable if you're just emailing between friends. The GDPR is a standard set for companies in and outside of the EU who are trying to engage in commerce with data subjects of the EU. It is in effect even if you do not sell anything. So if you make an attempt to sell something to an EU subject, then you must comply with the GDPR. So what happens if you have an employee that just sends an email to a friend of theirs and they use their work email, and perhaps the friend sends a picture to one of your employees? Clearly, vaguely, this could be in violation of the GDPR. The thing that we need to impart on you and that you need to understand is not to work in a silo. Get your legal team involved. Article 5.1 of the GDPR says, personal data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner in relation to the data subject. Transparent, we identify in technology as visibility, meaning you must have visibility to all data stores, whether they reside on distributed systems or mainframe systems. The GDPR does not say you should only do this for your Windows Unix systems that are linked to your SIEM and your Security Operations Center. It just says you must do this across all systems. Let's say somebody gets with the EDPB and says, hey, X company processed my data. They don't have a right to do that. Well, according to the GDPR, if you can satisfy one of these 6 requirements here, then you have legal authority to process someone's data. I'm not going to read these. You can look at them after the presentation, but it's important to get your legal team involved, because if it comes up, you may need legal help proving that you have the lawfulness of processing to process someone's data through an attempt to make e-commerce. I put this slide in here to let you guys know that the GDPR gets so granular, they even talk about churches and nonprofit organizations. So your local church and nonprofit that's near you that you might participate in is also bound by the law of the GDPR. Again, get your legal team involved. Don't work in a silo. One thing to note about supervising authorities is that the EU is made up of some 30 different states, and each state is going to adjudicate things differently. This is why you need to notify your legal team, get your legal team involved, because Spain is going to adjudicate the GDPR much different than Great Britain will, much different than France will, much different than Portugal will. You need to understand the nuances of the regulation by member state. Why are we here? We're here to talk about how technology can help you stay out of trouble with the GDPR. Again, you need real-time visibility across all systems. The GDPR does not say just do this across the systems that your SIEM monitors in real time. It just says you have to monitor the data, and you have to do it across all citizens. And if there is a breach, you have 72 hours to notify your supervising authority. The difference in the GDPR is that you're not just watching data. Most standards talk about watching data and who accesses the data. The GDPR talks about type of data and how you have to monitor and restrict and audit access to things as granular as name, photo, email address, computer IP address. And again, this has to be, the GDPR is relative to an attempt to sell a product or service. Even if the person you're communicating with never purchases your product or service, you still have to comply with the GDPR. Your DPO and controller and processor can also be liable for penalties for breaking this law. So they have a particular interest in understanding the ramifications of noncompliance. If you're familiar with the Target breach, the first or the 2 high-profile titles at Target, the CEO, the CIO, CISO, those titles were all removed from their positions. And you do not want this to happen with the GDPR. If you have good security information and event management or SIEM practices in place, then you should be okay. Leverage your SIEM for visibility to all access to all data stores by all users and privileged users. You should be okay. The thing to note is that your mainframe is already generating a lot of this information, and you just need to be able to get to it in real time and have it populate your SIEM or SOC. Just one thing to mention on this slide. As I mentioned in the IBM Ponmon survey, the 191-day average to identify a breach, there was a healthcare organization in New York recently that it was discovered that it took them 7 years to identify a breach. This is St. Peter's Surgery and Endoscopy Center in Albany, New York. It took them 7 years to identify the breach. So this is why you really need real-time notifications in your SIEM or your SOC. You don't want somebody from the EDPB notifying you, saying a citizen complained to them, lodged a formal complaint with them, and you're the second person to find out about it. You need to have the pulse on who's accessing your data, when they access the data, and have that information populating your SIEM or SOC. What do you watch for across your mainframe? You can look at event messages from RACF, ACF2, top secret, TCP/IP transactions, GICS transactions, DB2 and IMS accesses. With CorreLog, we have a product called zDefender, and zDefender can get these items in real time, and we present them to you in a dashboard, in a GDPR scorecard. You need to understand who's accessing that data, particularly privileged users, network security and audit logging. These are all controls that are identified in the GDPR and that CorreLog has put in the GDPR scorecards, and we'll look at that in a few minutes from a demo. Sounds like a lot of data, and it is. And you don't need to monitor and store all the data. You just have to look at the events coming from ZOS and correlate them across each other to identify anomalous behavior that may be indicative of cyber threat. Again, the goal is to get ahead of the 72-hour reporting requirement. I can't stress how important this is, given that the average time to identify a breach that Ponmon and IBM discovered is 191 days. You also need to look at file integrity of your operating system. CorreLog has products that can do that as well, but the file integrity of the operating system can also tell you if it's been tinkered with and changed in an attempt to breach the system. Now we're going to let Antoine talk a little bit about a use case of a bank in the EU that is using CorreLog zDefender to help manage and maintain the GDPR.
Thank you, Tony. So before I start, let me introduce Infotel and myself. My name is Antoine Gruson, and I worked at Infotel. Infotel is a European company with headquarters in France, and we are a business partner of CorreLog for Europe. And for my part, I'm responsible for software sales in Southern Europe, and I'm currently working on several GDPR topics for European companies, and this is one of those cases that I will introduce you now. So, after this brief introduction, I would like to talk a little bit about the general context of GDPR. The first thing important to know about GDPR is that it is not a list of security requirements that every company must apply. The idea of GDPR is to make companies responsible about personal data protection, in a sense that GDPR says that each organization must perform a global audit in order to identify personal data in its system, evaluate the data sensitivity, and adopt appropriate security measures depending on the nature of the data. In that sense, GDPR is a very transversal project in a company. It affects all the parts of the organization because personal data are just everywhere in the company. In a bank like the one we worked with, there is normally a project team that is created in order to ensure GDPR compliance. This team needs to evaluate every single process in the company in order to conduct risk and impact analyses. For our customer, the result of this audit was that 80% of the most sensitive data are on the mainframe. I think this is not an exception. It's probably the same for every company running a mainframe. You know, if you need a mainframe to run your company, it's probably that your most sensitive data are on the mainframe. But anyway, this result has raised several problems for our customer. The first one was that there was no mainframe expert in the GDPR project team. In fact, the mainframe team was not involved in the GDPR project at the beginning. And the second problem was that the mainframe was not taken into account by the security strategy of the company. I mean that the bank obviously had a security strategy with a dedicated organization and tools like a SIEM, a Security Operations Center, etc., etc. But the mainframe is just outside the perimeter. It's considered as safe, and it was just not considered by the security strategy. At the end, our customer had to answer the questions on how to monitor mainframe data security, how to integrate the mainframe into the standard security tools used by their SOC, and how to provide the mainframers feedback about all those security processes, and at the end, how to do that while limiting the impact on the CPU consumption, because we are on mainframe, so we pay for every bit. Tony, next slide, please. So to face this challenge, we deploy the zDefender software from CorreLog. zDefender is a mainframe tool that allows to capture all the mainframe activities. Data access, whatever it is on DB2, on IMS, on VSAM, user activity, admin activity, file transfer, authorization change, everything that occurs on your mainframe, zDefender can capture this event. And in fact, zDefender logs any single event that occurs on the mainframe and sends it in real time to your SIEM. In that specific case, for our bank customer, the message were sent in parallel to Splunk, which is the tools used by their SOC, and to the visualizer modules from CorreLog. We use this dashboard to provide the feedback to the mainframe teams. You know, the Splunk is the SIEM tools that were used by the security people, but we need to have a feedback for the mainframe guys. Tony, next one. And the result we get, something very positive about this project is that we use the CorreLog apps for Splunk. In fact, it is a specific app that CorreLog develops for Splunk. It's a ready-to-use dashboard for mainframe data. It's really plug and play with Splunk, and it saves us a lot of time. We don't have to develop anything for Splunk. It was just plug and play. And also, I want to say that the GDPR team of our customer worked for almost 2 years on this topic to find the best solution to comply for the mainframe to be compliant with GDPR. It took them more than 2 years. On our side, it took us 5 days to implement the entire solution on their 45 LPARs. And at the end, we just had no impact on the IBM bill. So it was really a good business case for the customer. And now I pass the mic back to Tony. Tony, please.
Thank you, Antoine. That was very informative. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. If you have any more questions about the use case Antoine just went over with the bank in the EU, please type your questions into the chat dialog and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So the product that this European bank is using is CorreLog zDefender. It's been around for about 10 years. It does a lot of different monitoring for ZOS facilities and to monitor access, particularly privileged user access, and also file integrity. For the purposes of the GDPR, we've put a few bullets in here that show how zDefender addresses you helping to be maintaining your GDPR compliance. Monitors all data stores containing privacy information, tracks all user access, including, again, privileged user access. Tracking access to external networks, there's a third-party provision, a third country provision in the GDPR that this will help with. It also meets ISO 27001 compliance, which is used in multiple compliance standards, including PCI DSS, FISMA, other standards for auditing and logging of user activity to data. We can send real-time alerts to the DPO when any anomalous or suspicious activity occurs. Those alerts can be in the form of emails, SMS text, or alert to your help desk system to trigger a help desk ticket. And it can also do auditing to the communication that you're having with the DPO to assure that the system is being managed and monitored to the GDPR standard. zDefender also has a unique user masking function that can be used to mask fields in the UI so that the system can respect the user's privacy. This is a visual architecture of CorreLog zDefender, and we're grabbing data directly from ZOS about ZOS access and data access, formatting that data while it's still in ZOS, and exiting to either zDefender Visualizer, CorreLog's distributed base SIEM, or any other SIEM in the marketplace. We have integrations to QRadar, Micro Focus, RSA Security Analytics. These are certified integrations that we work with these companies to achieve. We've also integrated in field integrations to just about every major SIEM in the marketplace over the past 10 years, including Splunk. Again, the notifications to the DPO can be sent through email, SMS, text, or trigger an alert to a help desk system to create a help desk ticket. Now we're going to turn it over to Peter Mills, who is going to do a brief demo of CorreLog zDefender and the GDPR scorecards. Peter?
Okay. Right then. So this is the, as Tony mentioned, the CorreLog visualizer for ZOS. So this is showing you roll-up dashboards as a result of the feeds that we're getting in real time from ZOS from various data sources, including SMF, but not limited to SMF. We get other data sources too. So these roll-up dashboards, they get their feed from the messages. So if I click on the Messages tab, you can see some of these raw messages that are coming in real time. You can see just a few seconds ago. Now these messages, they're all parsed in real time. When I mouse over them, you can see the underscores. That's indicating a hyperlink, so I can drill down further to see those messages. We have a keyword index here, so you can see that every single word of every message that's ever come in has been indexed and cataloged, so we have immediate access to it in our own proprietary data store. You can see here these messages. You know, they come in very, very fast. You could have, you know, hundreds of thousands of messages coming in, you know, hundreds of millions of messages per day, and they could be overwhelming. So what we do to make you and allow you to see the wood from the trees, we have these correlation threads, and these threads are looking for specific activity. You know, as part of the GDPR standard, it's important to log all system messages. You need to be able to track user accesses, you know, privileged user accesses, particularly anomalous behavior, potentially suspicious behavior. So unless you're tracking all the messages, you're not going to be able to know what might constitute suspicious behavior. You need to look at the broad range of messages for all message types and all users so that you can use these threads to see patterns in the activity of the user behavior. So for example, monitoring all TSO logons, monitoring anyone who's achieved some kind of privileged status. Monitoring console messages, DB2, MQ, encryption status messages, TCP/IP, APF alerts, RMF data, privileged user activity, KICS data. If someone uses the zap command to go and zap a load module, we want to be able to see that. So these are the kind of things we do. Now, from those correlation threads, you can see these threads have picked up this activity today, this activity in history. And from those feeds, or from those threads of data, we feed into the dashboards. So when I'm looking at my overview here, you can see here's my alert summary. So I've got a bunch of activity today in the last 2 hours. I've got some people that access some APF authorized libraries. I've got some people that access some GDPR data sets that I flagged as containing PII data or sensitive data. I've got someone that achieves super user authority. Somebody used the zap command, etc., etc. Multiple TSO logon failures. So I'm getting these warnings. This is my overview flow of messages. So I can see I've got a healthy flow of messages. This could be coming in from one or multiple LPARs. You know, we have customers that may have 100 LPARs all feeding us. Here is a summary of SMF data types that we're getting in. You can see here SMF type 30 for starts and stops of address spaces and step ends, some DB2 data, DS input when someone opens a file for input, some vSAN file accesses. These are all my RACF alerts here. DS output, there's files open for output, TCP/IP 119s, etc., etc. So we have all these message types coming in. Here I've got a summary of warnings and errors. Here's my top DB2 events. These are my console messages. I can drill down here and you can see these console messages here. So we can incorporate those into the activity that we're getting from SMF, etc. Top file events, some RACF events. This is my ticket status. So these messages then, they come in, as I said, in real time, and you could have hundreds of millions of messages a day. So we correlate them so we can group them into areas of messages that we want to see. We display them on the dashboards, but then the power is really being able to alert people. So we have a series of alerts like APF authorized library updated, sensitive ZOS dataset accessed, IND dollar file, someone's just downloaded a file, you know, DB2 catalog tables have been accessed, multiple TSO logon failures, things like that. So these alerts create tickets. And these tickets, you can see a bunch here. 1 minute ago, we had sensitive ZOS dataset accessed. You know, again, minute 28 seconds ago, we had an APF authorized library accessed. Now, these tickets have actions. And those actions can be things like sending an email, sending an SMS text message, sending an alert to a help desk system. You might have BMC's Remedy or ServiceNow or some other product you want to send a message to, things like that. And then, of course, we have all reports and things. And I'm going to show you some GDPR reports in a moment. But let's actually do some activity. Let me bring my ZOS system over here. This is my CorreLog server running. You can see my zDefender for ZOS. Now I'm going to start a new session. Host connect. I'm going to go TSOT GDPR. I'm going to log on as someone called GDPR. And of course that doesn't exist. I don't have an account called GDPR. So I'll exit from that. Log on with a real user ID. I'll put in an invalid password. So I got my password not authorized for user ID. Correct that. And now I've got my TSO address space. So if I come over to here and I look at my RACF dashboard, you can see some failed logons. Now this is over the last 4 hours. Let's just drop that down to say the last 5 minutes. And you can see that this is where I attempted to log on as someone called GDPR. I can click on that and drill straight down to the event. There's my RACF init logon undefined user ID, RACF event code 1.9, and you can see the user ID there as GDPR. I go back. One of the things that's useful is that all of this activity is also tracked by terminal ID. So if I come over to my messages and config, messages catalog and zterminals, I can see that activity here. This is a one-stop shop. I can see, if I go to the bottom, reverse chronological sequence here, 1 minute 24 seconds ago, this is where I attempted to gain access to the network. You can see there's a TCP/IP subtype telnet SNA init message. So you can see here my remote IP address 10.2.40.40. This was me coming into the system. It's where I came from. This could have been a Chinese IP address or something. And here's the IP address, is the LPAR that I was after. So here's my SNA init connection. Then I first logged on as, attempted to log on as a user ID GDPR, and I got the undefined user ID. So then I exited. So you see the SNA terminate, another TCP/IP 119 message. I came back in. This time I put in a valid user ID, so I got past the initial logon. And I put in an invalid password. So there you see the init logon, invalid password, RACF event code 1.1. And once I corrected that, then I got my TSO address space. So now you see an SMF type 30 message and the record type 30 there. And here's my user ID, and I got my address space, and again there's my terminal ID. So all of these messages are by terminal ID. So you could be, you could have, on a busy LPAR, you could have 100 million messages or more coming in a day, but this one view here will just show you the messages coming in for one user on one terminal ID. It's very useful. If I go back to my session and let's do something like 3.4, I'm going to go to sys1 palmlib. I'll edit this and let's select a member called GDPR, put in some data and try and save that. And immediately I got a RACF failure there. I didn't have the authority. You can see I attempted to update. I only had read authority. If I go back over to my dashboard here, you can see after I got my address space, the first thing I attempted to do was access sys1 palmlib. There's my name, my user ID, and there's the insufficient access authority, RACF event code 2.1. Okay, I go back to my TSO session. Let's cancel out of that. Exit. Let's get out of this. Log off. And I'm going to close my session. Okay, so I go back over to here, refresh this, and then you can see after the RACF failure, I started to log off. You see my step end, and then the address space is closing here, and then there's my telnet SNA terminate when I left the system. So this one-stop shop, this zTerminal display here, is everything from the moment I gained entry to the system, everything I did to the moment I left. It's very useful. Let's go back to the dashboards. And let's talk about some privileged user activity. Particularly, let's say DB2. Now here you can see we're monitoring DB2. And we're doing everything from all of the insert, update, select statements, deletes. This particular dashboard is showing the SQL access for audited objects. So I can click on this and drill down, and you can see, and there's the SQL being issued. Statement type delete, SQL delete from table name where seek ID equals 5. Okay, so this is using IFKID 145, which is monitoring audited tables. We also do things like administrative actions, so IFKID 361. So rather than monitoring every single piece of SQL on your system, and on a busy system, in a large financial institution, large credit card company, you could be having potentially billions of SQL executions a day. You may not need to audit every single one of those, but if you want to audit the privileged activity or anything performed by an administrator, then you can just monitor IFKID 361, for example. This one was monitoring audited tables. So you can identify which tables contain PII data, flag them as audited and just audit those. But if you want to audit everything, that's perfectly fine. It's all a matter of volume of data. So if I go to DB2, let's go to my trusty spoofy. I'm going to go user auth. I'm going to run some SQL here. This is some privileged SQL. You can only run this if you have some escalated level of authority. I am sysadmin on this DB2 system, so I'm going to select from sysIBM sysuserauth. This is looking to see which users also have a privileged authority, so whether they're sysadmin or dbadmin, etc. So I'm going to run that. There's the result of my query. And if I come over to here, let's look at the raw message to start with. I can do things like search. So sysIBM. Let's look at that. Okay, there you can see just 15 seconds ago, I ran a query. There's my user ID. And I attempted to bypass my normal KICS or IMS applications. And I went in, perhaps under the covers, and I selected some data from sysIBM sysuserauth to try and identify which users have privileged authority. So why would I be running a query like this? You know, someone needs to be alerted that this query was run. Someone needs to consider, did this person have a good business use for running that query? Why would he do that? If he's a DBA, fair enough, but do I know that that really was my DBA? Maybe it was somebody else using his credentials. I don't know. So if I go back to my dashboard, go to DB2, and here you can see sensitive tables, sysIBM sysuserauth. Straight away, it's gone red. I can click on that and drill down, see that exact same message that I just searched for manually. It's right there on the dashboard. Now, the beauty of having these on the dashboard is so you can see them. If, you know, you might have a SOC center, the big display on the wall. You could have a big monitor up on the wall showing these, whether it's RACF log-on failures or DB2 activity or IMS activity, whatever you want. But you're not always looking at the dashboards. You're not always looking at those messages. These messages offer a fantastic tool for your forensic analysis. If you see something suspicious, you can drill down, you can analyze recent messages, you can see what's going on over the last, say, 5 minutes. These are my top devices. These are my top users. You know, oh, look at all these people. What are they doing? You can pick out a user ID, drill down there and see exactly what that person's doing. But the real power is to do it without having to drill down and look at this data. Having these alerts, sending you text messages, sending you emails, SNMP traps, you know, tickets to your help desk systems, anything like that, anything that we can do to speed things up, because after all, we have to get within those 72 hours now. We don't want to wait 191 days. We've got to do it quickly. So if there's some suspicious activity, you need to be alerted immediately, in real time, and you need to investigate it. So these alerts enable you to do that. If I do something like, let's go and I'm going to copy a module from my test load library to my CZ agent load library, which happens to be APF authorized. So I'm going to copy this. I've just replaced a module in an APF authorized library. So if I come over to here, you'll see this alert just went red, because I have a rule that says if I see one update to an APF authorized library, if I see one in 30 seconds, I want you to alert me. So this alert created a ticket, and there's the ticket, APF authorized library updated. There's the name of the library. It happened 23 seconds ago. Well, it's all very well having it on a dashboard and alert on here, but what I really want is a message on my smartwatch. I'm sitting at home watching TV, or it could be 2 o'clock in the morning or at a weekend, and someone's just gone in and accessed this library. So there's an alert. Within seconds, it's right there on my wrist. I can see it. I can react to it. I can take whatever action I would need to. Similarly, if I did something, I've got there's an email alert there. So I have an audit trail. There's the raw message that came in, and there's the alert. Same thing. Okay. Now, let's do something GDPR related. I've got some data sets out here which I have flagged as being GDPR. They contain some PII type data. So let's look at these. I've got one here that contains some credit card information. Let's go and look at this. There's a bunch of social security numbers and credit card data. Here's, for the British out there, national insurance numbers. Here's an order entry system. I've got some orders here. A production database maybe. Someone's browsing this, or someone's going and editing some data with social security numbers. So there's a bunch of GDPR type data sets that I just manually edited because I have the authority. I'm a systems programmer. I can do what I want with these data sets, but it doesn't mean I should. So you need to audit them. Regardless if they're your trusted employees, you still need to audit them because you never know when you need to go back and see what they did. So if I look at my file integrity screens, here I'm monitoring data sets scratched, modified PDS members, and oh look, here's my dashboard, GDPR data sets accessed. I can see in the last, well this is 4 hours, but if I drop this down in the last 5 minutes, these are the data sets that were accessed in the last 5 minutes. I can drill down there and look at that activity. I know who did it, when they did it, I just don't know why, but I can certainly launch an investigation to find out if that person had a good business need for manually looking at those data sets. Similarly with my RACF profiles, I have a profile set up that says anything that looks like, my user ID.gdpr, I've put in a level 55 category. So those of you that understand RACF profiles, and of course this could be ACF2 or top secret, we support all three. If I click on one of these, you can see there's my level 55 because I set a profile that says anything looking like this, GDPR.asterisk, is going to be level 55 so that I'm specifically monitoring my correlation thread here. If I look at RACF, there's my level 55 data set. So what am I doing? Here's my rule that says it's got to come from at ZOS, which is one of my ZOS LPARs. It has to be a security message, which is RACF. And I'm not concerned with any particular severity, but I am looking for a value of level 55 in that data set. Okay, and then on the dashboard, my RACF dashboard, how do I get that feed? The dashboard, if I look at the widget here, the dashboard is saying selected correlation thread, RACF level 55, display it for the last 4 hours, and extract the dataset name and display it on the screen. So that's where I get my dataset. There. Now, when I was looking at when I copied that dataset over to the APF authorized dataset, remember, you can see over here APF alerts by dataset name. This is the list of dataset APF authorized datasets that were accessed. This is a list of user IDs that access those APF libraries, and these are the names. Now you won't get these names from standard SMF data. We enrich the data with additional information that we get from other control blocks. So we enhance it. I've added the username. So with our product, you get more than just what you see in SMF. We're getting close to the end, so let me show you my GDPR dashboards. What we've done is we've put together a dashboard that shows 12 of the top regulations from GDPR. You can see GDPR number 1, identification of data sources, devices containing or processing private information shall be, etc., etc. Here's the details behind that. There's the full thing. You can see GDPR recitals. These are the references to where this particular requirement is in the GDPR articles, and this is the Article 5 there. Now, we're monitoring mainframe GDPR scorecard data. You see down here, Z all messages and GDPR device status messages. Of those, I've had 111,000 messages today. yesterday and that. And because I've got these messages in, I'm okay. My percentage of daily average is 96%. So all of these boxes here relate to one or more of those particular requirements. Now this one here, GDPR 9, this is data store integrity. The integrity of all data stores containing personal data should be continuous. So when I access those GDPR data sets earlier, you would expect to see them here. So there's my GDPR file accesses. I can click on that, and that takes me straight to those same messages where I access the GDPR data sets. Okay, so from here, I can click on here. This is the dashboard roll-up of the GDPR scorecard, and this is the scorecard itself, where I define these are the requirements from the GDPR. These are the messages that I'm monitoring to satisfy those requirements, and I can see this is the volume of messages I've had today in the last 7 days, 30 days, so my status is okay. So you can show this to an auditor, and you can see that we're in compliance with all of these standards, so we know we're doing a good job. Okay, I'm pretty much sure I've covered most of the things I wanted to say. We're almost out of time. We need to get back to questions and answers, but I will just say that all of these dashboards and searches and rules and alerts that I've shown you today with our product, the visualizer for ZOS, could also be done with Splunk. We have a standard set of dashboards, a plugin that's now available on Splunk base. You can go there and download it. And we also support many other SIEMs out there. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand back to Tony for questions and answers.
Thank you, Peter.
A reminder that you can submit any questions via the toolbox on the webinar toolbar.
Andrea, can you make me presenter if you haven't already? So a couple of closing comments. I think it's important to note that every breach you read about in the news, if it's a company large enough to have a mainframe, they have arguably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, invested in security tools. So it's not enough just to have the technology. You have to add people components, you have to have process and workflow components, and all these need to work together. And it's a holistic approach to being within the compliance constraints of the GDPR. Also, don't do this in a silo. Include your legal team. There has never been any GDPR punitive damages issued yet, and the first ones are certainly to come, and you need to have some legal input to what your recourse of action in case you're accused of being out of compliance with the GDPR. Another thing to note, and this was recently pointed out in the share.org blog, is that this GDPR standard is going to standardize, or this GDPR law is going to standardize data protection rules throughout not just the EU, but throughout the world. Much in the way PCI DSS has standardized the way we process credit card information. We believe this is going to do the same for standardizing the protection of PII data. And with that, we can move on to questions and answers. We have a couple that have been entered into the chat dialogue. And we are also going to bring George Boucher, CorreLog CEO, into the queue for helping us answer some of these questions. The first one is the GDPR package a customized product, the package that Peter Mills was showing a short while ago? Is it a customized product, or is it something you can get in a package or out of the box?
Hi, Tony. This is George. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, George.
Good. Yeah, the GDPR package is essentially an add-on to our standard product, and comes out of the box with a whole bunch of different standard configurations, and probably needs a little bit of customization, but I think Antoine probably answered it best by saying he installed it, they have it up and running. and within a week, with a whole bunch of LPARs, is up and running and working perfectly. So,
good. Thank you, George. Here's another question that is similar, or that is tangential to the question that was just asked. What event formats does the CorreLog product you just showed support on the mainframe? We talked a little bit about RACF and ACF2 and a couple of others, but what other formats does CorreLog support?
Peter, that'd probably be a good one for you.
Peter, are you muted?
Peter, are you muted?
I think you are. There you go.
Unmute, there we are. So yes, as all the standard message formats that we read through SMF, and we can read log files and things, so KIX, IMS, DB2, all of those. But in terms of what messages we're sending out, most SIEMs are used to seeing the standard BSD syslog protocol, which is the RFC 3164 specification. But there are variations. For example, HP ArcSight uses the Ceph format. QRadar uses the leaf format. Splunk has a keyword equals value type format, and it also supports the SIEM, the Common Information Model. So we support all these formats, all the industry standard formats. You just configure the zDefender on ZOS to output the message in whichever format your target SIEM wants to receive, and you're good to go.
Great answer, Peter. And we should also point out that zDefender dashboards are now available through Splunk Base. So we've recently received validation from Splunk for zDefender within Splunk, and you can get that directly from Splunk Base. Here's another question that's probably for Peter as well. What about CRM contacts in my system that I haven't emailed in several years? How would we monitor that and make sure we're in compliance with the GDPR?
Well, I didn't show it to you today, but within our visualizer for ZOS, we have some additional plugins that are for anomalous behavior and is monitoring things. So we can see if somebody does something that they haven't done for a while. If we're monitoring devices and we don't see any messages from those devices for a while, you have various thresholds. And if we're monitoring the email transmissions as well, which we are, so we're monitoring the SMTP traffic, we can put in our anomalous behavior engine, we're monitoring those email addresses are being used, and then we have thresholds to say, well, if you don't see any messages going out for that particular email address or for that particular device or for that particular user ID after a certain period of time, then we can alert for that. So we can alert for excessive volume, we can alert for no volume.
Okay, we have about time for one or two more questions. Here's one.
Tony, it looks like there's one. It looks like we have time for one more. And
okay.
Basically, it says, "Do you have any other compliance products out of the box?" And I'll take that. CorreLog not only has GDPR, but we have ISO 27001. We have PCI DSS. We have HIPAA, high-tech compliance, and a number of different ones out of the box, all customizable by the customer or by our professional services. So I think we're about out of time there.
Yes, I believe you are. Andrea?
All right, excellent. Any questions that were submitted that have not been answered yet, you can expect an answer in the follow-up email when the slides are posted. So that concludes today's webcast. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, especially Peter, Antoine, and Tony, and the full CorreLog team for making today's presentation possible. This feature will soon be available on the SHARE website at www.share.org. There's a survey after this webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you complete it. And thank you again for attending today's webinar, and have a great day, everyone.